this roundtable, we are going to discuss about what are the ways to build resilience into IM systems and technology. For this, we are going to have 5 different speakers today. So they will introduce themselves when they speak, but just to quickly give you their names and organizations. So online with us on the Zoom, we have Cathy Richards from the Engine Room, and she will present with Darcelle Lewis and Sofia Colomé Shapiro from FRIDA. So 3 of them are online. And then in the room we have Benjamin Long and Frédéric Gibaudan from the CaMEALeON Consortium. Myself, I'm Florian Pujol. I'm working at HI, which you might know also has Handicap International, or maybe also Humanity and Inclusion. We have different names. And I'm the manager of the data of the IM department for HI. So I'm very pleased to be here today and to facilitate this session. So what are the ways of building resilience into IM systems and technology? So this is quite a difficult question. So what makes an IM system sustainable and resilient? There are, well, yeah, once again, difficult question. Just let me give you a quick example of the kind of things I faced, not every day, but quite often as working of head of IM in a quite big NGO. For instance, so just a few months ago, and this is a real example, even I was contacted by our team in Chad because they had hired an IM officer, and apparently this guy was very good, and he had started to develop his own system. So apparently he has a background as a web developer, and so he had started to develop his own web interface to do our data management and to do the management of all our one of the project with there was case management. So he had done a system where you could do data entry, enter all the information about the beneficiaries, and then it produces it produced dashboard and this kind of stuff. So he was very enthusiastic about it, and I had a call with him and the project manager, and both of them were so happy. So they were just demonstrating a proof of concept, but they say, well, it's really the way to go. We want to build this further. It answers all of the needs of the project, and so on and so on. And for it was very sad that I had to tell them, no, please stop doing that, because it looks like a great system, but I've seen that so many times, and I exactly know what's going to happen. This guy is good. How long is he going to stay in HI? 1 year, 2 years? And after that, he's gone, and the system, like 6 months later, it doesn't work anymore. So for me, sustainability, one of the key points, is also that the system that we build should not should not rely on one person, but they should really live longer than the person, that remain longer than the person who created them remains in the organization. So that's just one of the points on resilience, is that you have to take into account the human factors and the fact that sometimes we have very good systems, but if they rely only on one person, for me, it's not a good system. This is why, as again, leading the IM for HI, I have to remind people that we have some standards, we have some standard tools that we have decided at the headquarters level. These are the tools that the headquarters is supporting, and by supporting these tools and by making sure that they are deployed at organization level, we ensure that there is some sustainability around these tools. So this is just a very an approach that is very much centered on the need of the organizations, and our next speakers will have very different things to tell you, and very different approaches on this question. So I will let them speak. I think it's not the first, it's probably you just attended another roundtable just before that, so you already know how it works, but just to remind you, so we will have 3 presentations. So actually the first presentation is common by our three first speakers, and then so 3 presentations of around 15 minutes each, which will leave us about a big half hour to for Q&A. So yeah, if you have questions, please keep your questions for the Q&A session, and we will start the presentation right now with Cathy. Actually, you can start. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Florian. Hello, everyone. My name is Cathy Richards, and I'm currently the tech team lead at the Intern. A little about us. The Intern's mission is to strengthen the fight for social justice by supporting civil society to use technology and data strategically, effectively, and responsibly. Our service offerings include in-depth research, so things on the ground, biometrics and digital ID, consulting. Apologies, there's a delivery person. Consulting, very similar to what we've done with FRIDA, and light touch or pro bono engagements that last about a day or two. Our current project activities include deepening our technical expertise to strengthen our own resilience infrastructure. Also, we're giving more nuance to address complex digital resilience challenges in different contexts, all the while further integrating feminist principles into the work that we do. And also supporting partners to assess their current organizational and digital security processes and practices, and helping them build a way forward to more secure and resilient, justice-focused organization. And now, how does the engine room define resilience? As Florian said, there's different ways to see resilience. But through some of our internal work on digital resilience, we found that there were some recurrent themes, right? One of them being knowledge. How is knowledge institutionalized? As Florian said, once that person leaves that, built it, created it, whatever it might be, who's there to continue the charge, right? What do we need for a project or a technology to be sustainable, but also open and responsible to ever-changing contexts? Another theme that we found was around planning for emergencies. Is everyone able to participate in an organization despite whatever connectivity issues they might have, political unrest, whatever it might be? Also, are we planning ahead for potential issues and implementing mitigation measures? So, for example, backups. What security, organizational security measures are we implementing? Next, people. Are we thinking holistically and prioritizing everyone's well-being? Do they feel comfortable asking questions? So not just the tech aspect of it all, but how are people feeling when they're engaging with our systems? And lastly, the last theme was around practices. What do we do as an organization in our day-to-day? What training do we provide at onboarding and on a regular basis? And are we making time to evaluate how things are working and giving staff time to get acquainted with these new practices? Or are we just kind of throwing the technology out there and hoping people are able to just kind of keep up while they're also doing their work? Fortunately, the Engine Room has had the pleasure of working with FRIDA for some time as the thought partner through their own data and tech path. We've conducted research to support them in their data and tech strategy and identifying opportunities, things like that. We've also provided implementation support, which included activities around strengthening information management, for example, establishing better data retention, archiving and deletion processes, also deep dives, created work, tip sheets. Also help them out with prioritization to organize and make plans for implementation. And lastly, we supported them during their migration efforts, specifically in the lead up and during the migration week. But to tell you more about how those things went, I'll hand it off now to Darcelle and Sofia.
Hi everyone, I'm Darcelle, FRIDA's Senior Communities and Culture Officer. A lot of my work is focused on organizational strengthening and wellness strategies internally. So FRIDA is a grant-making organization. We provide core and flexible funding for grassroots organizations in majority countries. This funding in core, they choose how to use these funds, how they see fit within their context. This could be for capacity strengthening, emergency funding, a wide range of uses of these funds. And yeah, as Cathy was saying, as part of building resilience within FRIDA, we collaborated with the engine room to support our internal structures. So we had an audit done in 2018 to analyze the systems, the tools that we've been using, and how effective those tools are used within the organization. To promote like efficiency, ensure that anxieties are reduced within the organization, that we know where everything is because we operate 100% virtually and have been since the beginning of our existence. I'll pass to Sofia for the intros.
Thanks, Darcelle. Yes, hi everyone, I'm Sofia. I am the Tech and Data Strategist at FRIDA. And so, yeah, I've been co-leading this process with Darcelle for a while. Just this long-term process about, what tech we use, how we use it, and the logistics of changing to these alternatives. And could you actually go back to the one slide before this? Thank you. Yeah, so these are part of a longer document we created called our Tech and Data Principles. And this is important because when we're thinking about resilient technology, we really want it to be resilient because it aligns with these values, and it's also resilient because it aligns with these values. So I really encourage you to read the full document because it goes into more detail about each point, but I'll just go ahead and read them right now. So the first one is that nothing will be decided for us without us. And by us, we're talking about feminist movements, young feminist movements in majority countries. And 2, we want safe and open tech for young feminist movements. 3, privacy is a right as well as a collective responsibility. 4, access to most, exclusive to none. 5, our technology is for liberation, not oppression. 6, supporting young feminist tech developers in the tech they develop, key. 7, no one is left behind. 8, good design and art are key to technology. 9, learning something new and changing our habits takes time. And 10, we want to have feminist tech for climate and environmental justice. Could you go to the next slide? Thank you. So this one I just wanted to elaborate more because this one is really, really key to having resilient technology. We know that the tech use or development cannot enhance corporate power or the exploitation of the environment, lands, people, occupied lands, militarism, mass surveillance, online harassment, or gender-based violence, or any other violent practice of the capitalistic and patriarchal system. So all of this informs how we were going about choosing technology and also the practices we were using as an organization collectively, like deciding what tools we were going to use and also how we were going to use those tools. Like, for example, with our digital security, are we using those? Do we have enough rest? Are we following care practices when we use those tools so that we're not incurring more risk or using them unsafely? Could you go to the next slide? So as part of this, we have this process at FRIDA called RAD, which stands for, oh my gosh, I'm blanking on RAD. Darcelle, can you help me out for a second?
Retention, archiving, deletion.
Yes, thank you. I'm sorry, I'm nervous. Retention, archiving, deletion. So basically, this is everything that has to do with our data management practices. And the engine room and FRIDA, we collaborated a lot on this long-term process. And it makes us more resilient because it has been a really participatory process. So really everyone at FRIDA has been involved in the decision-making process and understanding, why we need to change to technology, to pick technologies that align with our feminist values, as well as we've been prioritizing open source and software-defined technologies to emphasize our privacy and data. We handle a lot of data of these feminist activists, and so it's really important to be aware of surveillance and data selling to third parties and things like that. And it's also just been a practice of self-reliance, trying to use technology and tech developers who are based in the global south and majority countries, and just being more intentional. And this has been great for the resilience because we're just being so intentional about our practices. Could you go to the next slide? And I'll pass this to Darcelle.
Okay, thanks, Sofia. So some of the care practices that we use as a foundation in this process is our Happiness Manifesto, which we created a few years ago as a compilation of practices that align with our values. It is political, and we can drop a link on that to share with you all at the end of this presentation. But essentially, during this process, we tried to think about not just the process of implementing these new tools, but also taking into account the care practices while at work. So when do we log in? When do we check notifications? What are our work boundaries? Because this will directly impact our ability to be careful and intentional with the data. And we hold so much sensitive data, grantee partner information. And so we really need to be very intentional and careful with this information. And so really needed to take into account where we are, how we feel, are we tired, are we burnt out? We're more likely to make mistakes if we operate from that state. And so ensuring that folks feeling rested, that they have the support that they need, they have the resources they need. During this transition, where we migrated from Gmail to ProtonMail, and then the transition from Drive to Nextcloud, we had an organizational-wide tech week. So we let all of our partners know that we will be unavailable to some extent. Emails will be down, just letting everybody know what was going on. We had half days of work during that week with the intention of focusing solely on the migration. Sophia and myself, and with the support of some other colleagues, we had some Q&A support groups available during the week of, like, every day during Tech Week. So as people migrated, as they tried to navigate Nextcloud, if they had any questions, we were available for them as needed. And this support continued beyond Tech Week. And then we also had 2 trial parties. So before we decided to migrate to ProtonMail, we had some parties with a group of people from FRIDA, where they tested ProtonMail versus, I think, Tutanota, just to figure out, like, which tool will be better for us, will best serve us in the way we're navigating, because they've been using Gmail for the entire time, and sometimes new tools are a little scary. They might not have the same abilities as the tools that we're used to, so just ensuring that those are aligned and people feel comfortable. And we went with the majority vote, which was ProtonMail. Can we go to the next slide? And I think that might be you, Sofia.
Yeah, so we learned a lot from this process, and it's still ongoing because we have a long list of priorities that we're trying to change and incorporate over time. But yeah, we just learned, it has to be a truly participatory process. You can't just have one person who's the tech admin of the organization do everything for everyone, because everyone needs to understand the importance of data and privacy and sort of be in charge of it themselves. And it's also it's going to be challenging and inconvenient sometimes, changing from Gmail to ProtonMail. It's not, you don't have the same features. So you have to understand why it's necessary to sort of get you through those moments of change and inconvenience, or newness. We also found it was really helpful to have like roles, assigned roles, and point people throughout the organization, and regular meetings to coordinate this, because it was a real it's a logistical challenge. And we had office hour sessions as well for support. And can you go to the next slide? And yeah, the other learnings we had that I just wanted to share are, if you're thinking about migrating to a self-hosted platform like Nextcloud, definitely get support, get long-term maintenance support, because yeah, you want to have that stability. All of a sudden, the sort of the data management, everything happening in the background, like backups and maintenance of the server, that now becomes your responsibility, unlike at these big tech corporations where they do handle a lot of that for you. So you need long-term maintenance support that you can rely on. And yeah, just ask the following questions in terms of making this plan for resilience. You know, what are your priorities? What needs to happen first? What is your capacity for those changes? Because not everything can change all at once. And yeah, hire the support you need. Don't just assume it can be added to existing workloads, because this is its own project in and of itself, and set aside the time to do it. So yeah, thank you so much. Those were our learnings from this process.
Thank you. Thanks a lot for this presentation. I'm sure there will be some questions, but we'll keep them for later. And for now, I let Benjamin continue.
Thank you very much. I'm gonna. Can you hear me well? It's good. Yeah. Good. So yeah, my point of view. You may have heard me this morning. My point of view is only going to be about environment. So I'm not going to go on to, because resilience is really broad term, and it embraces a lot of different things. So I'm just going to focus on the environment here. If I start with the fact that resilience is the fact that you're able to continue your activity if there's something, catastrophe or something. We've got to prevent the risk, and we've got to prevent the environmental risks, and that's what I'm going to have a look at. So starting point is how it works. So how it works, simply just go, as I mentioned this morning, we've got to get back to what is digital and what material is involved. So when you create data, when you collect data, you're going to store these figures, this data on hard drives, which can be HDD or SSD, it depends. And these hard drives are stored in generally in data centers, which are big houses with servers, and in which you have the hard drives in it. So it's really material, and you got to get back to this, and we're going to have a look at what are going to be the environmental risks on these different parts. Let me remind you that you remember when I said this morning. You have impacts both on fabrication and manufacturing phase and on use phase, and also there's something I didn't mention this morning, is that when you operate a data center, most of the time you're going to need to cool the inside of the data center, and to cool it down, depending on where you are in the globe, you might use a lot of water. Yes. So this is another resource that can be involved in our process. So what are the ways to build resilience and to make it more sustainable? First thing I would like to mention is obviously the lack of resources. I pointed out this morning there may be shortages of resources. So let me do the way of thinking again, the process again. The more data you collect, the more storage you are going to need or going to use, and the more metals and natural resources you're going to need to produce them. So clearly there are risks of shortages of certain metals like tin, zinc, and silver, and there are also risks of water and energy shortages. So To prevent this situation, clearly you've got to define the data you really need and their use case. Definitely focus on what is necessary and don't go too far. And other recommendation would be to define an end-of-life policy for your data, especially archiving your data and deleting the data. This, I think you heard it already this morning, so I'm not going to talk a lot about this. The second thing, and I didn't mention it this morning, it's climate change exposure. That's a risk you have to take into account as soon as you're defining an IAM project, and especially where you're going to host your data. You must be aware, but there are some climate risks here. That can be rising of temperature, that can be flood. I don't know how to say it in English, but flood. Okay, thank you. Or even a shortage of water. This can, well, we are experiencing it in the last few years, and you know it's going to increase. So we have to get prepared to this. And what it means is that, I'm sorry I didn't put the picture here and I did it afterwards, but I took two maps, the one with the climate risks, like for example flood or rise of temperature, and on the other hand the map of data centers in the world. And sometimes you get good surprises, or bad surprises, I would say, especially for data centers in India. In India there's flood risks. The risk of flood is really high in the next 30 years, and you've got a lot of data centers over there. So what it means is that all the data centers that are implemented in India, for example, might have a risk of being flooded and so not be operational anymore. So if you're hosting your data up there, if there's a flood, there's going to be a problem for you. So you've got to pick up the location of your data center carefully. Normally, people who are operating data centers take care of this, and you know they're not going in areas where there's big risk of floods or big heat waves. But still, you have to take this into consideration. For example, water shortage could be an issue. Some data centers in the US, especially, use a lot of water to cool down the IT rooms. And so they are taking water from the soil and sometimes water from the water system. So if there's a big heat wave and there's not a lot of water available, maybe the data center is going to be there's going to be a choice to make, and maybe there's going to be something about closing the data center or stopping the data center for some few hours. Right now, we're kind of experiencing this situation right now with the energy crisis. I know that data centers are just thinking about using their fuel energy to operate and not to use the electricity of the grid anymore, because you know they're going to be shortage in the next few months. So this situation, we've got to preview what could happen. You know, if there are choices to make. Of course, to make it more resilient, obviously we've got to take care of the climate change, and so limit the amount of hardware. Oh, sorry. I'm like Colomé. I forgot something. Yes. Sorry for the shitty reference. Because I was telling you, you got to pick up the data center carefully because of climate risk, but choose it carefully also considering privacy issues. Once again, where you store the data could be there could be data could be read by the US government, for example, if it is under the cloud out of the PSI. If I remember the rules. So yes, step number 3 is contribution to climate change. Of course, using all the data is having an impact on the environment. So the recommendation would be to limit the amount of hardware needed and choose the data center in order to lower the emission. And step number 4 would be avoid unnecessary use of resource. I'm repeating, but I know this is the only way to remember this. But resources are scarce, so avoid dark data or unusable data, clearly, and ensure the usability of your data through time. The example which was given about the HR, the one you picked up at the beginning, is really interesting because if you're doing a big project at the beginning and after that nobody is able to maintain the database, it's lost, and you have mobilized resources for nothing, so it's not good.
Can you just explain dark data? I'm not sure it's clear for everybody.
That's a term I found while preparing this roundtable. Dark data is, I think, it's defined as the amounts of data which is sleeping in the database and not used. They are collected but not used, and that's a huge amount. Well, of course, these figures are purely theoretical, but I think I've read like more than 60% of the data is dark data or something like that. So it's every time like that, you're collecting a huge amount of data because you say, oh, maybe I will need it one day, and you're never going to use it. So we're storing huge amounts of data for nothing. And I think I'm done.
Okay, great, thank you. And our last speaker would be Frédéric.
Hi. As a naive practitioner, I'm a heavy user of Nextcloud and Proton, like our fellows. And so my angle today is about some considerations on the open source. When we talk about resilience and sustainability, I think it involves robustness and fit for purpose tools and interoperability. So, interoperability present with other partners and with yourself in the future, actually, because many things change, including internal policies. So, having a fit for purpose is also something that needs to be independent from a provider, because we were speaking of not relying on a single person, but relying on a single provider is also quite risky in case the provider defects, flows, or I don't know, or they just go bankrupt, or they change their governance and they give up on ascendant compatibility or whatever can happen. And we also need to have some customization of our need, because as far as I can see on the market, there is no tool specifically designed for humanitarian action. Maybe there's a couple of tools, I don't know, but mainly what we use every day was meant for profit businesses, big corporates. So, I'm talking about private proprietary solutions. So, now I think those three main aspects: robustness, fit for purpose, tools, and interoperability, are better addressed by the open source software community. And the good thing is that they are quite cheap, because most of the time it's free or cheap, because the support you might buy is still quite cheap compared to proprietary solutions, and it also joins the resilience of our infrastructures. For example, most of if we're talking about a global disaster, for example, that would break half of the internet. Solutions that are resilient to that kind of thing, such as the Web3, you might have heard about that, or the serverless internet, or data center-less internet. This is all built on open source software like IPFS or something similar. But even all the routers and like many software that are in the infrastructure were actually built on open source software. So this is already kind of the case in some sectors. Check. Don't want to forget anything. So yeah, what I personally like in my everyday work with the open source software is the possibility to have like better channels for feedback to the developers and providers. You can request features, you can report bugs, and it's gonna be, I mean, in my experience at least, it was always better than with a big corporate. And it was you are heard, people answer you, not some corporate, but something relevant, and they might ask for help to chase the bug, etc. Also, the open source code, I think you all know it, is auditable and kind of audited more and more often. And the maintenance of open source software is often relies on the community of developers. And so, if again, it's like it avoids to rely on a single person or on a small group of persons. And as aspect the interoperability, I've had in my experience some problems when my employer is kind of using a proprietary solution, and then we need to have a partner, and they don't have the license, or the other way around. And sometimes Western NGOs are imposing expensive licenses to NGOs in countries where it might be very expensive when compared to the currencies and the life level. So, and sometimes you just don't have the time to go through the procurement process. You need a solution. You need to do some job right now, and one of the two partners doesn't have the license, and they would need to go 2-3 months of procurement process to get the license, but you need the job done now. And so, I mean, it happened to me, and that's really inconvenient. And that's why, I mean, it never, of course, happened with open source. It's very quick and reactive. So my point here is to point how because all this was a theory, of course. I mean, when I deal with a healthy open source development community, it's kind of easy because there are many people. They are doing well. They don't have a money problem. They get funds, etc. But sometimes there are amazing solutions relying on communities that just lack funds, and so people just maintain the solution on their spare time, etc. And that would be something amazing for the humanitarian sector. So if only we were able, I don't know, with donors and between NGOs to coordinate some funding, which would be really ridiculous compared to our budgets, maybe 0.01% or something like that, but it would still be several thousands or tens of thousands of dollars each year, probably, maybe more. And we could actually fund some open source development software and make it thrive. And actually, we would be able to request new features, evolutions, and to, like with bounties, or I see there are now crowdfunding software platforms. So I think we would be better served as a sector by tools that really fit our purpose, our workflows. It would be more resilient because we would not rely on any corporate actor which would have too much power over the whole sector, which is the case right now with Microsoft, I think. And I think it might even be cheaper, actually, even if we massively fund open source development. It might be cheaper than buying licenses and having to rely on those companies and to force those licenses on our partners too sometimes. So yeah, that was my kind of my 2 cents for the discussion.
Thanks a lot. Sorry for Cathy, Darcelle, and Sofia. We have some internet connection issues. I hope you are still with us. Not so sure. Okay. I will switch to another connection maybe. So in any case, thanks a lot for this presentation. So we have had very different approaches on the topic. So maybe a first one that was more on the ethical aspects and also on the change management within the organizations to make sure that everything that we build is really rooted into the organizations, which makes it more resilient. We have had considerations on the environmental aspects and then the open source aspects. So I think these are very different ways to approach the topic. So it's now time for questions. So I don't know if one of you want to start with questions. Yes? In the background.
Thanks. So I just wanted to respond a bit to Frédéric's presentation. So I'm somebody who's been involved with open source software over the last 15, 20 years. Contributed a lot. I've written a lot of open source software that maybe some of you use. But I also want to point out that there's sometimes a tension between resilience and open source development and open source communities. And so even as somebody who's spent a fair bit of my life writing open source software, I've also written a lot of proprietary software. In fact, I've started a company that builds humanitarian software, and that was done for reasons of stability, of sustainability, and resilience. Because communities, whether they're open source or whether they're organized as a company, they have all their own culture. Right? So you can have an open source community that's not responsive to users or is uninterested in what users are doing, and you can have a company that's really focused on supporting humanitarians in the field as a vocation. So I don't think it's quite so clear cut. I think in cases where you have open source that's working, then that's fantastic and we should support it. But where there are cases, especially around business processes or processes that don't attract open source volunteers, those are places where you might find other ways of funding software development, which, regardless of the license you use, is very expensive. It requires a lot of time and energy. So I just felt a little bit addressed in that, and as a corporate show, and wanted to give my 2 cents.
Thanks. I mean, this is a good point, and I think you've perfectly described the present situation, and I do agree with everything you said. And I think that could be improved if there was a coordination between humanitarian actors to get involved in the funding and in maybe the orientation of some, not all, but some open source development communities. To get some really some tools that would be really tailored for our needs. I mean, I know it's emerging. I know some private sector now companies are targeting the humanitarian sector, not only in software development, by the way. And so yeah, I mean, it could. I mean, the gap could be bridged from both sides, probably. Yeah.
What he said, like as an open source enthusiast, I like go and reach organizations and people to use open source, contribute to open source. But the common question I normally face is, if I use or host software or anything, who will take care of it if something goes wrong? Because things like disaster happens, or in such scenarios, there is no chance for room of errors. So what they prefer for proprietary software, why they prefer for proprietary software is if there something goes wrong, then there is a team of service team of that specific company to act upon, and for who takes the responsibility or who helps up when it goes something wrong in the case of open source. So how are we going to tackle this?
Right.
You want to answer, or it's another question?
Both if you want.
Is Cathy are they connected or?
I don't know. Sofia, Cathy, Darcelle, can you hear us? We have some connection issues. I don't know if you hear us. In any case, we don't hear you.
I can hear you now, but I was not able to hear that last question very well.
Okay. So the question, if I try to rephrase it, is open source is great, but what happens if something doesn't work, if something breaks down? Who is going to fix it? Because usually, like if you are working with Microsoft and you have a bug or you have a problem, you are going to contact Microsoft support, and since you have a contract with them, probably they are going to try and do something for you. But what happens if you are using an open source? You not necessarily have this kind of support. So what can you do in this situation? I don't know if one of you wants to jump on this one.
Sofia, definitely feel free to go ahead as well. But yeah, essentially, I mean, there's multiple ways to do it. There's definitely organizations that provide the specific open source platforms. So you might have like Nextcloud, I'll call them registered because I can't find the word, but Nextcloud registered support people that have their own experience, and you would just kind of have them as your own personal support system. So they do exist. Obviously, it might be a little bit different if it's just like some code that you found in GitHub that's being supported by 5-10 different people. But usually, like the more robust tools already have kind of like a licensed community that you can reach out to. They often have like a directory on the website of people that have experience in it.
Yeah, thanks, Cathy. I'll just add to that that this was a challenge that we experienced, I'll say that it's important. I think it's important for us that we are hiring and training young feminists to do that kind of work. And so when we were looking for people and organizations who could help us maintain our own servers, we were looking to basically invest and pay and support and other feminists in majority countries to be able to do that kind of maintenance work and to run our own servers, to be part of this movement, to be using open source software libre, and like be sort of autonomous with our data. And so I think it's definitely harder and more work, but if you have the resources, I think it is important to prioritize that. And recognize it is a challenge, and we needed good expert people who could do maintenance on our server when there was a bug on our Nextcloud server in particular, and figure out how to migrate our emails and stuff like that. And so it was a skill and a practice that we decided to put our resources behind. And yeah, Darcelle, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, just to say, like, if you don't have those systems in place, like, you will be responsible for it. So we encountered that with the bugs, and Sofia, like, working very hard to figure out what those bugs were and how we can correct them, reaching out to Cathy at the engine room just to figure out what was going on, because yeah, it was not something that we were expecting. And we also, the person who established xCloud for us no longer worked with us, just before we started the transition. And so also trying to figure out how did they create this and these bugs that we were encountering. Even when we brought somebody new, they were encountering bugs that we just could not figure out. It's also part of the learning, like really ensuring that you have a team of people of support for any unforeseen circumstances.
Just to add up what has been said already, in my experience, I have like 20 years experience with Windows and Microsoft, and a little bit less, like 6-7 years experience deep in open source. I mean, when I had bugs with Microsoft Office or Windows, I never had any answer from Microsoft. I mean, I was too small. When I had bugs and I had with open source solutions, I would just write to the community and they would fix it right away. Or they would even sometimes need to investigate more, and they would, it happened with ODK, for example. They gave me access to their servers so that I could kind of help them. We were collaborating remotely and we were trying to fix the problem. It happened. So being responsible is maybe legally something, but solving the problems, I don't think one is better or worse than the other, honestly. And second point, that's why, I mean, you're right. I mean, that's a legitimate question that you ask, but that's why I'm hoping, suggesting is even too strong of a word, but I'm hoping that someday we massively get interests in the open source, because we might improve things. Like as a sector, if we coordinate our fundings, our requests, our management, we might completely improve those kind of problems.
Thanks, guys, for the very insightful thoughts. So, I just want to maybe remind everyone, like, if I can, that using open source software is not free. So you guys are using CartONG.
Can you just try to speak?
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. That's the thing. Open source is free in terms of freedom, as you know. I'm sure you heard this motto before, but it's not free in terms of cost. You using CartONG, it's a fantastic system. I use it personally for my own email. It's open source, but I dare you to host it on your own servers. Like, you will contract them to host it for you, and have your emails there. Right? Likewise for your Nextcloud, you will hire someone to host it for you and maintain it for you. So I think the resilience part here is that you won't have not a centralized, but you have lots of options for you to go about like supporting and your hosting and all your different systems. I think that's part of the resilience. Now I'll be actually interested to know from you guys, from FRIDA, the cost of the transition, how much it costs you to operate on Nextcloud and ProtonMail versus the Google Suite, right? I think it will be an interesting thing, because I think money in this transition is becoming more open source driven, resilient, and from all perspectives, environmental, but also like all the other perspectives. I think cost is not something we should elude, because the reality is that we have to pay for it. Right? And then I think my last comment is around. So one more question for sorry, I forgot your name. Benjamin, yeah. I'm curious because we're thinking about like the environment here, and we're saying, data centers like are not great. I'm saying like have cost, like there is cost to using data centers, or like you've shown like how like let's say the impacts on the environment from these data centers. So just to maybe solve this question once and for all, like should we use data centers or should we local host ourselves at home? Like I think maybe it's an oversimplified question, but I think it's a good one. Google says they have 100% solar power, like energy, like thermal renewable energy data centers. There's like I don't know how much the factor of like increase of data we've collected over the last 20 years, maybe 100, 1,000. yet our data centers have not grown that much, so the efficiency of the data centers is like hugely improved. So all these things are to consider. And maybe my last one, and I stop because I don't talk too much, but I think we use open source in our section. I think also for an ethical reason. I think we shouldn't forget about this, right? You know, open office is not Google Workspace. It will probably never be. I think, you know, probably from a future perspective, Workspace is way better. Like, but you know, if you put, you know, your money where your mouth is, then you will go for an open source solution. I think the ethical perspective should drive funding, as someone said here. So we really, we want to agree with that, and that comes with a lot of the constraints regarding where do you host, how do you maintain, and all this kind of stuff. Thanks, and sorry for the long contribution.
Just a point on the data center, if you want to discuss this topic tonight, come to the Digital College. That's definitely the topic we're talking about.
Thank you. Maybe we'll start with the first question, which was for FRIDA. I don't know if you... Did you hear the question, or should I repeat it?
I heard maybe 70% of it, so maybe just repeat that.
Okay, not too bad, but still, I will repeat it. So, to make it very short, the question was, what was the cost of the transition from the tools you had before to these new free open source software that you presented? So you've presented what all the actions that you put in place to do the transition, but the question was really about the cost.
Yeah, I can start to answer that. The cost ended up being primarily the virtual server space that we're renting the server space to host our own instance of Nextcloud, and we're doing that with 1984 hosting, partially because of their privacy practices and their energy consumption practices. They're relying on green energy, and I think it's specifically geothermal, hydropower. And yeah, so primarily the cost of the server and also the labor of maintenance for Nextcloud, and just the support in the process. So from the engine room, in defining like what our retention, archiving, deletion, data cycle process would look like. Those are the main things. And we do also have like an organizational plan with ProtonMail, but it really the costs ended up just shifting from the services we were using before to instead use our own server space and labor. And yeah, Darcelle, do you want to add anything I missed?
Yes, I don't have the exact numbers, but at some point, so like right now, we're also still paying the Google Drive because we're still in this slow transition process, and so, and then we were transitioning from Dropbox as well. So at some point, we were paying for all of these inputs and like all of these platforms at the same time. So the cost, I would say, we haven't saved anything. It's a lot more right now because in transition. But this was a really good question that we will prepare for like future limits to really highlight the exact cost of this transition.
Yeah, I think what I remember it's $3,000 a year USD for the virtual private server. Yeah, and in this migration process, we did also downsize a bunch of accounts. So there was some shifting around, but yeah, I would say be aware if you're in a longer term migration process of tools, you might have two commits at the same time.
Benjamin, I think the next question was for you.
So yeah, about data centers. Let me be clear about this. Data centers are necessary, and they're not clearly not the bad students. So I cannot, blame and shame all the data centers. Definitely. Your question was, what is the best situation between hosting yourself and going into the cloud or going to colocation or whatever? That's an excellent question, and you pointed out there's no simple answer. My advice on this would be that if you are just alone, you've got one server which is used for one service, which is a small service, and so the server is just in the room here. It uses a lot of energy, and you're not cooling it down, and it's not optimized because you've got just one service on it. I'm pretty sure you better go to the cloud. Definitely, you're gonna have something which is mutualized, which is optimized, and finally, the energy used by the server every year is going to be fewer in the data center than compared to your own usage. I've seen, for example, I've seen a lot of data centers in local governments in France, and that's horrible. Definitely, there are rooms like this. They've got windows up there, so when it's heating, when the sun is heating, it's heating inside. When it's cold out, it's cold also. You've got, just 2 racks of servers. You're just alone in this big room. It's really, really cold. It's colder than it should be. And my point is that the energy spent to maintain these servers is just phenomenal. Why it should be, nothing in a data center. So it really depends. My conclusion is that it really depends on what services you're going to host, how many servers you're going to have, and how did you define well the architecture of the data center if you want to host it by yourself, and also if you have resources to do so. Because if you don't have any resources and you have to, spend money for someone to maintain it, there's no point about it. So, after the only thing about data centers and hyperscale data centers, aside, if you take apart the thing about sovereignty, I would say that there's a rebound effect because everything seems to be easy and accessible. You can, get more CPUs, more RAM, more servers really easily, just 3 clicks and you've got something else. So it's there's a rebound effect in the fact that if you're hosting outside, maybe you're gonna upscale your need. While if it was on your own, maybe you're the one to put the server and to go and put the RAM in it. So maybe you're a little bit more sober when it's in your data center.
You had a third question, or did we answer?
I'm not a specialist, but I'm donors, and more and more our directive is to have some solution where Sectum Cloud, where we have to have the server in France or in Europe. And another part, we want to promote some open solution, but in my comprehension, most of the solutions actually are working with Amazon Web Service, Google, etc., etc. So how can we promote these two solutions with an open community? Who work we are efficient. You just said before that in France, actually, most of the data centers are badly managed.
Local governments only. Yeah. Not for everyone.
So how can we have an approach dealing with these two problematics when we have to, like donors, and if we can't, we will be. We will be in the obligation to promote some private solution, because finally they are most of the part the only one who can deal with this kind of problematics.
Maybe I can start, and if you want to add something, just to, I hope I'm going to be able to answer your question. I would say that you're right. It's I mean, you would have win because you're using open source, but you would have lost because you're going into these big cloud providers, so you're losing your sovereignty. Well, first of all, you've got to assess the risk. Finally, there's always a question of balance. So you've got to decide, and I think it's into each organization's hands to decide whether or not you should go to the cloud or not. Then I would say that there are some cloud providers which are not as big as Google, Amazon, or whatever. Maybe not as accessible, maybe not as cheap as them, but who are offering, offering hosting services using green energy for whatever it means, but who are also really involved into ethics. And so maybe the answer would be to, well, depending on the audience of your service or where you have to access this and the level of security, the level of accessibility you want, maybe you can pick up a data center host which is more respectable and which is not one of the big GAFAMs. There are some.
Not to promote them, but just for of information, can you just name some of them?
There's one we often. I'm sorry, I'm going to be a little bit Frenchy in this way, but no, it's not French actually. It's in Switzerland. There's one we often talk about, which is called Infomaniac with a K at the end. And they're hosting, I think they're hosting Nextcloud and all open source suite like they've got Jitsi, they've got Nextcloud on the Office on it. I think they're hosting all this. There are other couple of web hosters, I don't remember their name well, but Infomaniac is the one we're using a lot. Or even maybe Scaleway in France, we've got a Scaleway, which is, it's Iliad, so we can discuss about it. You wanted to, yeah.
I'll continue a little bit what you're saying. I think you can host any software on any server. Today, everything is built on virtualization technologies, containerized technologies, so everything is deployed everywhere. So there is no contradiction between using open source software and hosting it not in Google or not in Amazon or not like big GAFAMs or whatever. So I don't think that's actually there's no technical issue to host Nextcloud anywhere in the world on any sort of data center, right? The question is whether that provider gives you a level of easiness you have given by that provider, whether they give you like a one-click install or they give you like just the server and you have to log in and like install everything. So that would be the difference with like hosting software. You can do it on any server, and so that's not really that's not a problem.
Thanks. Just to add up a little bit, I use yourownnet.fr. They are French too, and I mean they seem quite paranoid on their cyber security. So it's a good. I think it's a good start at least. I use them, and and because they provide a Nextcloud instance with you as the admin, and you have the possibility of downloading all the possible plugins from Nextcloud. They leave you with that, contrary to most providers, by the way. So most providers, they give you access to 3-4 plugins, but they just leave open access to the whole market app store. I don't know how they call it. And I'm sure there are others, but just to mention this one. And just also I wanted to mention that Proton, we're talking about Proton 9, Proton has now released the Proton Drive. So it's end-to-end client-side encrypted. And it's the only problem right now with the Proton Drive is that they haven't released yet the client synchronization app. So I mean, there is the app on phones, but not yet on computers. So we still need to wait for a few months before we have those synchronization clients. But once it's released, I think that may be the best option if you can afford it. And I think that's it.
Thank you. Do we have more questions?
Sorry, I just wanted to add that even if you use, GAFAM clouds, if you feel confident, and I think that's not too much to learn, but if you feel confident in just encrypting your data locally with keys that you master and you protect, before uploading that data on such clouds, that's no problem. It's questionable because in July 2020, the European Court of Justice confirmed that putting personal data on American clouds is illegal in Europe. And other national data protection bodies confirmed it. It's illegal. Everybody still does it in Europe, 90% of the actors, because it's difficult to convict everyone in the continent. But theoretically, at least, it's illegal. So, and encrypted data is still considered as a personal data because there is a way, if you steal the encryption key, somehow to retrieve the data. So, so it's questionable, but at least on a technical point of view, with the reasonable efforts, etc., I think right now it's still a good solution to encrypt your data with something like a cryptometer or similar software and upload it to an American cloud. I do it sometimes when I can't do anything else.
If I could just offer a slight correction. What the European Court struck down was the safe harbor mechanism. The standard model contracts are still a perfectly legal way to
it's been dismissed.
No, the safe harbor, not the standard model clauses.
Yeah, you're right. But the standard clauses, the standard clauses come with the obligation to assess if the law of the destination state is compatible with the European law, and that court has stated that the US law is not compatible with the Charter of Fundamental Rights of Europe. So basically, it reduces to being illegal.
Well, not yet, but as long as you have a contract with the American firm that respects the safe harbor and the model clauses are very different. I think that's important.
Yeah, definitely. But still, the argument of the European Court was that there is no recourse for a European citizen that could be used against, for example, US authorities or US intelligence, and if they think there is a misuse of their data. And so the American law was not providing an equivalent level of protection, and so it was not compatible with the charts of fundamental rights. So it was in between. They left some room for future negotiations, but for now, and I know they are negotiating for something replacing the safe harbor, but so far, right now, theoretically, it's illegal. And I think many councillors have interpreted it this way, and more European bodies are now forbidding US clouds inside there. I know AFD, or present, I know they are on that path. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Any other question? Okay, maybe I have one last question, which is more for FRIDA and also maybe Cathy. So you've started a very drastic change, I think, in the way you are managing your data and information. Did you plan on having some kind of evaluation, maybe in 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, to see if what are the outcomes of it, and if you have actually increased the resilience of the systems? Maybe resilience was not the only objective, but did you plan to do this? And if yes, can you tell us a bit about this?
Yeah, I can start, and Darcelle can add, and Cathy can add as well. I think right now are in a period of reflection and gathering feedback from people in the organization, mostly because the transition, especially from Google Drive and Dropbox to Nextcloud is a big one, and it's ongoing. And our initial plan of doing it in basically it was a 6-month lead up with a lot of logistical details, but of having everyone, off of one platform and onto the other during our office closure week did not go as planned. So that's our first evaluation, and right now we've been in a period of reflection and trying to figure out what would be a better strategy going forward. And yeah, Darcelle, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I think the reflections and learnings will be ongoing, because as we realized that RAD wasn't just this one-time transition, but will be a lifelong practice and new way of working, new culture, FRIDA. So we're just going to reflect and share learnings as we go along, and might share goals, and particularly we would like to share a report with our community, and maybe that might happen within the next 2 years, to give time to fully transition, as I think that be in line with our strategic plan, the 5-year strategic year 3 of it, and so this is also part of that plan, and so it'll be part back once the strategic plan is complete and we go into the next phase of planning for the next 5 years. Pass to Cathy.
Thanks, Bo. For us, as they go to the process, that learn pretty quickly when something is not working. So we want to do everyone going their own resilience process and make changes. We made changes to move away from Zoom. We set up our own platforms. You learn very quickly. Within a week of launching, people are like, "Well, this is happening. So while we do have kind of these evaluation periods and moments of touching base with the team to see how things are going, it also kind of just happens naturally. People use the tools. But yeah, outside of that, we're also playing different ways of measuring and evaluating how the tools are working outside of the traditional, let's say financial things, the traditional ways of measuring how things are going. We're trying to see what other ways we can kind of gauge how resilient the organization is. And it could also be, how everyone's feeling. Just kind of, if they feel like they can do something with the tool, they feel comfortable with the tools, whatever it might be. But you do learn, the feedback process happens pretty quickly.
Okay.
Can I just add one thing?
Yeah, sure.
When we continue this feedback process, I also just really want to ask people how they feel their data life cycle has changed. Some of the feedback we got that started this process was that people had a lot of redundant data or lots of redundant files. Our comrade was saying that we have dark data. So we had a lot of dark data that wasn't being used and was taking up data storage and things like that. So I would like to ask, if people feel like they can find things and they have less of that redundancy. That would be a metric I want to ask about.
Okay, thank you. We have only a few minutes to close this session, so maybe what we can do is, I would like to ask each of you to maybe say a final word in 1 minute. Maybe the thing you want us to live with. So maybe we can start with the people online.
Sure, I guess we'll keep the same order. Thanks everyone for coming. I can't really see you. Thank you all. Yeah, I guess the final words from the engine room is just, remember that the people are at the heart of things. These platforms don't work on their own. People have to come and use them. So definitely, make sure you take them into account as you're planning, and make space for change. Which sometimes, even us, all of us with our New Year's resolutions, we're like, for this year, it's going to be the change, and you expect to see things February, March. But we have to give some time for people to get into new habits and to get accustomed to new tools. It's very easy to get frustrated very quickly.
I would just like to highlight the interconnectivity with us, the tools, the environment, and just really making that known. Because sometimes, we think of the internet, we think of these tools as something abstract or outside of us, but really taking into account all the factors that go into the creation of these tools to operate in. And when we think of those things, we can really build the resilience, within our community, as individuals, as collectives, in our movements. I'll pass to you, Sofia.
Thanks everyone for coming and for your questions. And yeah, I would just like to offer my solidarity with all the struggles worldwide, finding these alternatives and resilient systems for each other.
On my side, I really appreciate this roundtable, and I've learned a lot myself. And what I would say to conclude is that it's a really multi-angle question. We've seen lots of angles of resilience, and my guess is that finally it's in your organization you've got to prioritize what are the key topics for your resilience, what are your key stakes for the resilience, and what is the time horizon. Maybe you're not going to take the same decision if it is for the next 2 years or the next 10, 20 years. And doing that work, just keep in mind that we are contributing to climate change, so try to make also the decision, because I'm pretty sure if you've got the small amount, if your time horizon is really short, you're not going to take into consideration climate change, but just keep that in mind in order to not to take the bad decisions.
So thank you everyone. Thanks for the fruitful exchanges. It was a pleasure to hear all that. I think I have nothing more to add, except maybe we forgot one angle is that I think at least half of the resilience is achieved by multiple backups. Do backups and encrypt the backups, because otherwise they are a new vulnerability. But I think the resilience is mainly about backups.
Thank you for this conclusion. I'd like to thank our speakers, especially our 3 speakers online. Sorry again for the technical issues, but all in all, I think we managed to hear you quite well, and I hope that you heard at least 70% of what we were saying. And thanks also for our audience for your very interesting questions, and thanks to CartONG for helping us organizing the session. Thank you. Have a good evening.
Thank you. Thanks for having us. Thank you all.